There are encounters that cannot be planned and cannot be predicted and cannot, afterward, be fully explained in terms that satisfy the rational mind's preference for causation. They simply happen in the particular way that certain things happen when the ordinary machinery of a life produces, without warning, a moment of contact between two people who would never otherwise have been in the same room at the same hour, standing on the same piece of pavement outside a venue entrance on a cold October night in Los Angeles in 1992. This is a story about one of those encounters. It is a story about a woman named Claire Nakashima, who was 24 years old on the night in question and had driven 40 minutes from her apartment in Culver City to the Wiltern Theatre on Wilshire Boulevard on the small, unlikely hope that a sold-out show might produce a return ticket at the box office before the doors opened. It is a story about what she was carrying that evening, not in the tote bag over her shoulder, but in the interior spaces that a 24-year-old carries, without always knowing the weight of them. And it is, inescapably, a story about Robin Williams, who had come out a side entrance of the Wiltern Theatre for air between a sound check and showtime, in the dark athletic jacket and the restless energy that were his between-show signature, and who had almost walked straight past Claire Nakashima standing at the edge of the backstage entrance area without noticing her at all. Almost. But Robin Williams noticed people. It was what he did, constitutionally, without effort or design. He noticed them the way certain people notice music, not as something requiring attention, but as something that simply arrived, insisting on itself, demanding response. He noticed Claire Nakashima, and what he did next over the course of a conversation that lasted 20 minutes on the pavement outside the Wiltern, and then 2.5 hours in a backstage room after the show, and then a brief, unrepeatable exchange at the stage door as she left, has shaped the way Claire Nakashima has done her work for 30 years. She is a therapist now. She has been a therapist for 26 of the 30 years since that October night. And she tells the story of the backstage encounter to different people at different times, in the specific way that people tell stories that have functioned as lodestars, not frequently, not casually, but when the moment calls for it, when what the story contains is precisely what is needed. The most attentive listener I have ever encountered, she says. I met outside a concert venue in Los Angeles in 1992. He was world famous, and I was nobody. And for 2.5 hours, he made me feel that the interior of my particular life was the most interesting thing in the room. She pauses. That is the thing I try to do for every person who sits across from me, every single time. I have been trying to do it for 30 years. She has not always managed it, but she has always tried. Claire Nakashima had grown up in Pasadena, bright and quiet, and inclined toward the interior life in a way the people around her recognized as characteristic, but did not always know what to do with. She had, from an early age, a specific interest in why people did what they did, not as an intellectual abstraction, but as a practical, urgent puzzle that she could not stop turning over. These questions led her, circuitously, toward psychology. She had graduated from UCLA in 1990, and by October 1992 was 2 years into a graduate program in clinical psychology at USC, living in a small apartment in Culver City on a stipend that covered her rent and her groceries, and not much else. She had bought the ticket to Robin Williams' show 6 weeks earlier, an extravagance, the kind of calculated small extravagance that graduate students permit themselves when the weight of the ordinary becomes temporarily unbearable. A family situation had prevented her from attending. The ticket had been refunded. The evening had been lost. But she had driven to the Wiltern anyway. Not entirely rationally, the show was sold out. The box office had no returns. She knew this before she left Culver City. She drove there regardless. The way people sometimes drive toward things they cannot have. The movement itself functioning as a form of feeling, a way of being near something rather than absent from it. She arrived 40 minutes before showtime and stood at the edge of the backstage area, in the particular liminal space of someone who is present at an event they are not attending. That was where Robin Williams found her. He had come out through the side door at the edge of the backstage area for the reason that people who are about to perform large, energetically demanding shows sometimes come out for air before they go on. The combination of preparation and the specific restlessness of waiting, the need to be briefly outside the controlled environment before walking into the one thing you can never fully control, which is a live audience. He was wearing a dark, athletic jacket over a plain shirt. He had, as always, the quality of barely contained motion, not fidgeting, not performed energy, but the specific physical signature of a person whose interior life was operating at a velocity that the exterior could not quite contain. He came out the door and turned left, and almost immediately encountered Claire Nakashima, standing at the edge of the backstage area, hands in the pockets of her jacket, looking at the entrance of the venue with the expression of someone who is somewhere they did not plan to be and is not sure what to do next. Robin Williams stopped. He looked at her. "Are you waiting for something?" he said. Claire Nakashima looked up. She recognized him immediately, the face, the voice, the physical presence. She experienced the particular disorientation of encountering someone famous in an ordinary context. The brief misfiring of the brain's categorization system that occurs when a person who exists on screens suddenly exists in 3 dimensions on a pavement beside you. "I had a ticket," she said. "I couldn't use it. I wanted to be near it, I suppose." "That sounds strange." Robin Williams looked at her for a moment. "It doesn't sound strange at all," he said. And he sat down on the concrete step outside the side door. He sat down on the step. Not metaphorically, not approximately. He lowered himself to the concrete step in the dark athletic jacket and put his elbows on his knees and looked up at Claire Nakashima with the complete, focused attention that was his most fundamental characteristic and said, "Tell me about the ticket." What followed on the pavement outside the Wiltern Theatre that evening was a 20-minute conversation that Claire Nakashima has described many times in the 30 years since, each description slightly different, each one reaching for the same essential quality that she has never quite managed to capture fully. Robin Williams asked about the family situation that had prevented her from using the ticket, and Claire told him not everything, not the full weight of it, but enough. He listened with the specific quality of attention that she would spend the next 2.5 decades studying and practicing and teaching to others. Attention that was not waiting for its turn to speak. Attention that was not organizing what it heard into categories and responses before the person had finished speaking. Attention that was simply receiving, present, openly holding what was being given without immediately deciding what to do with it. He did not offer solutions. He did not offer reassurances. He did not perform the empathy that people sometimes perform, which looks like listening and produces the sensation of being managed rather than met. He simply listened and asked questions. Specific questions, not the general questions of someone going through the motions of engagement, but the precise questions of someone who has heard exactly what was said and wants to know more about it. Why that? What that was like? What happened after? Claire answered. She answered more than she had intended to, more than she would normally share with a stranger, more than seemed, in the abstract, proportionate to the situation. But the situation was not abstract. The situation was a man sitting on a concrete step outside a concert venue at 9 o'clock on an October night in Los Angeles, giving her his full attention with the specific sincerity of someone who had not arrived with an agenda and did not intend to leave with one. At some point, she does not remember exactly when the conversation shifted. Robin Williams began talking, not performing, not doing the thing that his public self did with language, the rapid fire, the characters, the velocity. He talked the way she would later learn people talked when they were being real, simply, without performance, in the voice that existed beneath the voice. He talked about his own experiences of loss, not in detail, not in a way that made the conversation about him, but in the way of someone establishing common ground. acknowledging that the interior landscape she was describing was not foreign to him. He said, "The thing nobody tells you about the family situations is that you're allowed to be angry and still love them. You don't have to choose." Claire Nakashima has quoted this sentence in supervision sessions with trainee therapists. She has referenced it in papers. She uses it with attribution and without when the moment calls for it. It is, she says, one of the most clinically precise formulations of ambivalent attachment she has encountered anywhere. Delivered by a comedian on a concrete step outside a sold-out show in 1992. After 20 minutes, a stage manager appeared at the side door and said something to Robin Williams about the time. Robin Williams stood up. He looked at Claire Nakashima. "Come inside," he said. The show lasted 2 hours. Claire Nakashima watched it from the wings, not from a seat in the house, which was full, but from the stage right wing, standing with a small cluster of crew members, with an unobstructed view of Robin Williams performing to a sold-out crowd in the full, extraordinary exercise of the gift that had made him famous. She has spoken about the experience of watching the show from the wings in several interviews over the years. She describes it as unlike any other experience of watching live performance she has had before or since, not because of the quality of the performance, which was extraordinary, but because of what the vantage point revealed about the relationship between the performer and what he was doing. From the wings, she could see his face during the moments when he turned away from the house the fraction of a second between one direction and another. When the face that was presented to the audience was briefly invisible, and what remained was simply the face of the person doing the work, she could see the concentration, the effort, the specific quality of a man in total, committed contact with what he was doing. And she could see, during the moments when the laughter was at its most intense, when 2,000 people were responding with the full force of their combined delight, something in his expression that she has struggled to describe accurately. Not distance exactly, not absence, but a quality of being simultaneously fully present and slightly elsewhere, as if the experience of being witnessed by so many people simultaneously produced, paradoxically, a particular kind of solitude. She thought, this is a person who is very good at being seen, and who finds being seen, at this scale, profoundly alone. She has never said this to anyone directly. She wrote it in her journal the following morning. It is, she believes, the observation that set the course of her entire clinical practice. That visibility and intimacy are not the same thing. That being seen by many is not the same as being known by one. And that the hunger for the latter does not diminish in proportion to the supply of the former. After the show, she waited in the backstage area while the house cleared. She did not wait with expectation. She had not been told to wait, had not been given any indication that the encounter on the pavement would continue. She waited because leaving felt like the wrong thing to do before it was clear that she was supposed to leave. Robin Williams found her in the backstage area 30 minutes after the show ended. "I have 2 hours before I need to be anywhere," he said. "Are you in a hurry?" She was not in a hurry. They sat in a backstage room, 2 chairs, a table, the accumulated props of an evening, water bottles, a towel, the detritus of a performance recently completed. Robin Williams had changed out of the stage clothes and was back in the dark athletic jacket. His energy was different now, lower, more interior, the post-performance state of someone who has given a great deal and is in the process of returning to the self that exists before the giving. He asked her about the graduate program, what she was studying, what she wanted to do with it. She told him about her interest in the therapeutic relationship specifically, in the question of what actually produced change in a person, what the mechanism was beneath the technique, why 2 therapists using the same approach could produce results that were so dramatically different from each other. Robin Williams listened to this with the same quality of attention he had given her on the pavement, focused, complete, not hurrying her toward a conclusion. He asked her what she thought the mechanism was. She said she thought it was probably something about the quality of presence, whether the therapist was truly in the room or was somewhere adjacent to it. managing the encounter from a safe professional distance. The problem with safe professional distance, she said, is that the person can always tell. They always know if you're managing them or actually with them. And if you're managing them, the change doesn't happen. Robin Williams was quiet for a moment after she said this. Then he said, "That's true of performing too. The audience always knows. You can do everything technically right and still be managing the room rather than in it. And when you're managing it, you can feel it not landing. The laughter is different. Everything is different." They talked for 2 hours about presence and performance and the specific difficulty of being truly with another person rather than adjacent to them, about what it costs to be genuinely in a room rather than managing it from a distance, about whether the cost was sustainable and what happened when it was not. At one point, Robin Williams said something that Claire Nakashima wrote in her journal the following morning and has referred to in the 30 years since. "The thing I've noticed is that the people who are best at being with other people are always the ones who've had to figure out how to be with themselves first. Not comfortable with themselves, that's different. With themselves, in the room with their own experience without immediately trying to fix it or perform it away." Claire Nakashima looked at him. "Are you with yourself?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm working on it," he said. It was the most honest sentence she heard all evening, including her own. At midnight, she stood to leave. They had talked until the backstage room felt like a room they had been in for years. She gathered her jacket and her bag, and Robin Williams walked her to the stage door. At the stage door, he looked at her. "What's your name?" he said. He had not asked until now, and she had not given it, and neither of them had noticed the omission until this moment. "Claire," she said. "Claire Nakashima." "Claire Nakashima," he repeated. "You're going to be very good at this." She asked how he knew. "Because you asked me if I was with myself," he said. "And you waited for the actual answer. Most people don't wait. They hear the first thing and they're already moving to the next thing. You waited." She has thought about this observation many times in the 30 years since. Not because it was flattering, she has long since trained herself out of the vanity of flattery, but because it named, precisely and succinctly, the thing she believes to be the most important element of the work she does, the waiting, the actual wait for the actual answer. The refusal to receive the first response as sufficient when the real answer requires more time and more safety to arrive. She walked out the stage door into the October night. She drove back to her apartment in Culver City. She sat at her kitchen table and wrote 5 pages in her journal. She did not see Robin Williams again. She sent a letter to the Wiltern Theatre a week later, addressed to him, thanking him for the evening. She does not know if it reached him. She suspects it did not. It does not matter, the letter was its own act, complete in itself, regardless of whether it arrived. Claire Nakashima completed her doctorate in 1997 and began her clinical practice in Los Angeles. She has supervised the clinical training of 43 therapists, most of whom have heard, at some point in their training, the story of the backstage encounter at the Wiltern Theatre. She learned of Robin Williams' death in August 2014 between client sessions. She sat in her office for the 10 minutes before her next client arrived and thought about the pavement, the concrete step, the dark athletic jacket, the 2 hours in the backstage room, and the sentence about waiting. She thought about what he had said. The people who are best at being with other people are always the ones who've had to figure out how to be with themselves first. She thought about, "I'm working on it," the specific, irreducible honesty of that answer. The absence of performance in a moment when performance would have been entirely available. She thought, he was working on it until the end. She went to the window and looked at the street below. Then she went to the door and called her next client in. In one interview, given to a clinical psychology journal, she described the 2.5 hours in the backstage room as the most instructive experience of her professional life. "He gave me a demonstration of what genuine therapeutic presence looks like in practice." He was not trying to demonstrate it. He was simply doing the thing he did, being completely present with another person, without agenda, without performance, without the managed distance that protects the helper from the cost of being truly with them. I have spent 30 years trying to do what he did naturally that evening. I have not yet fully succeeded, but I am, as he once said to me, working on it. The show at the Wiltern Theatre on that October night in 1992 sold out completely. Every seat was filled. 2,000 people were in the house. They laughed and applauded and left into the Los Angeles night, carrying whatever the evening had given them. Claire Nakashima was not in a seat. She was in the wings, watching from a vantage point that revealed something about the person on the stage that the 2,000 people in the house could not see from where they were sitting. And then she was in a backstage room, being listened to with a quality of attention that she has spent 30 years trying to give to other people. She did not get the ticket. She got something that could not be ticketed, and she has been giving it away ever since. That is the whole story. A sold-out show. A young woman on a pavement. A man who sat down on a concrete step and said, "Tell me about the ticket." And 2.5 hours that changed the course of a professional life. And through that life, the lives of every person who has ever sat across from Claire Nakashima in a therapy room and felt, without being able to name it, that they were genuinely in the presence of someone who was truly with them. That is the gift Robin Williams gave on a Tuesday night in October 1992 outside the Wiltern Theatre in Los Angeles. He gave it, as he gave most things, without knowing fully what he was giving, and it is still being given.